Good morning.
Om Sada Shiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Pariyantam Vande Guru Paramparam Om Sahana Vavatu Sahana Vunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat. Om Namah Shivaya.
Om Tat Sat. Om Namah
Shivaya.
Okay, so we had finished with the Upasana portion, and now we shall look at the next verse, which is verse number 10. So we'll chant. Please unmute yourself. Hritstale manaha swastata kriya.
Hritstale manaha swastata kriya.
Bhakti yoga bodhasya nishchitam.
Bhakti yoga
bodhasya nishchitam.
Okay. So he says, Hrit sthale. Hrit is the heart. Hrit sthale, in the heart. What should you do? Manaha swasthata. You should fix the mind. And kriya, karma, bhakti, upasana, yoga, ashtanga yoga, bodha. Bodha means jnanam, consciousness, jnanam, nishchitam. You can understand? It's very simple. In one verse, he has covered all the four sadhanas. So, the first and foremost thing, of course, is to fix the mind in the heart. That is the Hristale Manaha Swasthata. Mind should be fixed in the heart, which means you should focus the mind. Mind is within yourself. When you say within the heart, you are withdrawing the mind from the world and fixing it inwards. So, Manaha Swasthata Hristale. Fixing the mind within oneself. And what should you do? Kriya, that is Karma Yoga. Bhakti, that is Upasana Yoga. Yoga, that is Ashtanga Yoga. Bodha, Jnana Yoga. Okay. So this Bhakti Yoga is to be split carefully. That one word yoga we are not adding here. In the verse it is not there, but in the verse the yoga doesn't refer to Kriya Yoga, Bhakti Yoga. It refers to Ashtanga Yoga. And therefore there are four different sadhanani which are being talked about. Kriya, Bhakti, Ashtanga and Jnanam. So what is the objective of all sadhana? That is what is being discussed here. Manaha swasthata. The mind should be able to abide in its own nature. In the Atma Swarupam, the mind should abide. Why? Because whenever the mind flows outwards, whenever the mind is engaged in interacting with the world, in external objects, it is always a source of stress. And therefore, Ramana Maharshi is saying, make sure the mind is resting in your heart, which means you are focusing the mind on the Chaitanya, the Sakshi, the consciousness principle you are focusing on. Then the question is, how do I do these other activities? If my entire concentration is inside, how am I going to do any other activities? Must I stop any other activity in the world? So that is not what is meant. You have to carry out your daily activities, but the mind must always, at least subconsciously, abide in the Atma. What does it mean? That any pleasure, any ananda which I get is to be derived from inside me, from the consciousness principle, from the ananda of Satchitananda, not from external objects. And when ananda is permanently available with me, inside me, as the consciousness principle, then I don't need any external object external people, or the external world for my happiness. And that is the state which is called Jivan Mukti. Because you are free from attachment to everything. You don't need any object, any person, any event outside you for your happiness. And that is the state of Jivan Mukti. And this Jivan Mukti is the aim of all these four sadhanas: Kriya, Bhakti, Yoga, and Jnana. So Ramana is saying over here, all these four Nishchitam are definitely prescribed for what? For Manasvasthata, mental abidance in oneself. Knowing oneself as the Atma, knowing oneself as Ishvara. All four sadhanani have this aim. Now, if you look at what we have covered so far, the word Kriya, meaning Karma Yoga, we covered in the first 6 verses. Then Upasana, we covered in the last 3 verses which we did, verse 7, 8, 9. Now, Yoga, Ashtanga Yoga, is being covered in verses 10 to 12, and Bodha, Jnana Yoga, will be covered in verses 13 to the end of the text. Okay. Now the point is, will any of these sadhanas, Kriya, Bhakti, Yoga, Ashtanga Yoga, will it make us in this condition of Manasvasthata, abiding in oneself? No. Shankara has made it very clear, Shankaracharya makes it very clear that the 2 parts of the Veda, the Karma Kanda and the Jnana Kanda, also known as Veda Purva and Veda Anta, have completely different objectives. You can look at the Anubandha Chatushtayam. You remember? Adhikari is one, Vishaya is one, Sambandha is one, and Prayojanam is one. Okay. So what is the Adhikari for Veda Purva? The Adhikari, the qualified person, the one who comes to Veda Purva, he basically focuses on karma, right? Not on jnana. So the very Adhikari for Veda Purva, he comes to Karma Yoga because why? He needs Chitta Shuddhi. And therefore Veda Purva's objective, Karma Kanda's objective is Chitta Shuddhi. And therefore the person who comes to Veda Purva does not have Chitta Shuddhi. And that is his objective. That is what he wants to get out of Karma Kanda. And once Karma Kanda has done its work, then he will acquire a new Adhikariship. He will become an Adhikari for Vedanta because his mind would have got Chitta Shuddhi. So the person who doesn't have Chitta Shuddhi is the person who comes to Veda Purva. So he is the Adhikari. And his prayojanam is what? His prayojanam is Chitta Shuddhi. And of course, Veda Purva also has many rituals for many materialistic things. And therefore, Veda Purva has prayojanam, that is the benefit of Veda Purva, is both materialistic benefits in terms of worldly things to be acquired. You know, you have wealth, you have children, all these, there are rituals in Veda Purva. So that is the Adhikari who comes there. And through these karma, because he focuses with Ishvara Arpanam attitude, through this karma, he gets Chitta Shuddhi. So that is the Adhikari for Veda Purva. But the one who comes to Veda Anta, he already has Chitta Shuddhi. And therefore, he does not want anything material out of this study. His focus is Jnanam and therefore Moksha. And therefore, this is Shankara's point, that Veda Purva and Veda Anta have got different prayojanam and different adhikaris. Therefore, the first 3, Kriya Yoga, that is Karma, Bhakti, and Ashtanga Yoga, they will give you what? Chitta Shuddhi. So the use of Kriya Bhakti Yoga is for the sadhaka who is a beginner, to convert himself into a person with Chitta Shuddhi. And therefore, the Adhikari for Veda Purva, after going to Veda Purva, will convert himself into an Adhikari for Jnanam. And that Jnanam will give moksha. But in this verse, if you see, Ramana clubs them all together as if the entire objective is only one. So this goes against what Shankara says. So we have to interpret properly that the first three are sadhana for preparation. They give chitta shuddhi. They make you ready for jnanam. And without chitta shuddhi, one cannot come to jnanam. It is an integral step without which you cannot come to jnanam. But it is not direct sadhana. It is not the sakshat sadhana. The sakshat sadhana is only shravanam, maranam, nididhyasana. And therefore, the first three, karma, bhakti, as well as ashtanga yoga, they all prepare you for chitta shuddhi. And chitta shuddhi prepares you for jnanam, and jnanam gives you moksha. And therefore, Ramana says that yes, all these three will have ultimate objective of moksha. So this is the manner in which you have to understand. Three are preparatory. One is the direct sadhana. It's like you go to the airport to take a flight, right? Without going to the airport, you cannot take a flight at all. So if you're going from, let us say, Bombay to Delhi, you have to go to the airport at Bombay. But simply going to the airport, you will not reach Delhi. Number one, you have to go to the airport, and number two, you have to take the flight. And this sequence of events, a clear idea of what are the sadhanas that I have to undertake in my life, with a very clear idea of what is the benefit of each sadhana. That has a very technical name, which Krishna talks about in Bhagavad Gita, Vyavasayatmika Buddhihi, chapter 2. So very clearly, clarity in my thoughts as to the sadhana and sadhyam, as to the means and the ends, and how many means there are, and what are the specific ends for each means. I must know the entire route map I must have. Like when I go from, say, Bombay to Delhi, the first thing I do is to catch a cab to the airport. That is the first step. What is the idea there? The sadhana is catching a cab. The objective is reaching the airport. After reaching the airport, I take a flight. So sadhana is catching the flight. Objective is reaching Delhi. From Delhi, I will go to wherever I am going to stay. So sadhana is taking a cab. So each leg, each sadhana I must know. Each sadhyam I must know. Clarity as to that understanding is Vyavasayatmika Buddhihi. And this is not just in only in the jnanam field. It is any spiritual, any field actually, any walk of life. You want to buy shoes, you can't expect to walk into a textile showroom and get shoes. You have to go into a shoe showroom only, right? Shoe shop only. So that way, that clarity is very important. So that is, he talks about the what general sadhana is, and then he will start to talk about it in detail. So we look at verse number 11. So please unmute yourself. Vayurodhanad liyate manaha.
Vayurodhanaliyate
manaha.
Jalapakshivad rodha sadhanam. Okay. So, Vayu Rodhana. Rodhanam is to control. It's the method of ensuring that you breathe in a particular pattern. So, Vayu here means your breath. So, Vayu Rodhanat, by the control of the breath, liyate manaha. So, laya is to subside, to get destroyed. So manaha liyate, the mind subsides, the thoughts in the wandering mind, they all subside. How? Vayu Rodhanat. And then he gives an example, Jala Pakshavat Rodha Sadhana. Just like the net is a method of arresting the flight of the bird. Jala Pakshavat Rodha Sadhana. Rodha Sadhana is that which is a controlling instrument. Jala Pakshavat. Like Jala is a net thrown over a bird, the bird can no longer fly. And therefore, Vayu Rodhanat has to be understood as Prana Rodhanam. Another name, and Rodhanam is control. Another name for control is Ayama. So Pranarodhanam, Vayurodhanam is equal to Pranarodhanam is equal to Prana Ayam, Pranayama, regulation of breath. So by regulating the breath, what happens? The mind is controlled as if you have and the example is given. How does the bird get controlled when you throw a net over it? The bird cannot wander anymore. Similarly, when you practice pranayama, the mind cannot wander. So all of those of you who are regularly practicing pranayama know that there is a link between the thoughts in the mind and the rate of breathing. And if you look back, when you are angry, you will find that your breath is coming very fast. So a lot of thoughts are there spilling into your mind, and accordingly, you're breathing fast. And when you are very relaxed, say you're on a holiday and sitting on the beach, then my thoughts are few, and that is why you feel peaceful. If you have to understand that when we say that I'm peaceful, it means that the number of thoughts in my mind have come down, and that is why I find the peace. Thoughts in the mind are always a disturbing factor. So whenever I say I'm feeling peaceful, it means the mind is having very pleasant thoughts and very few of them. And therefore, if you lie on a beach and are staring at the ocean or at the setting sun or at the rising sun, you will find that you are peaceful. Your breathing is very long and very controlled and very peaceful, very slow. And this is acknowledged even by Hatha Yogis. The Hatha Yoga Pradipika has a verse. Chale vate chalam chittam, nischale nischalam bhavet. Chale vate chalam chittam. Can you translate? Chale vate chalam chittam. What does it mean? Anybody? Hatha Yogis, all of you.
Wherever the breath goes, mind goes.
Chale vate, where the breath is moving, chalam chittam. The mind is also moving. Nischale, when you have to supplier, nischale vate, when the breath does not move, nischalam chittam bhavet. So it's a sutra, therefore a lot of things are left out. So actually if you expand it, chale vate chalam chittam, nischale vate nischalam chittam bhavet. When the breath moves, the mind is moving. When the breath does not move, the mind also does not move, which is the very principle of pranayama, right? And therefore, the Hatha Yoga Pradipika says, after this line it says, yogi sthanutvam apnoti. The yogi will be stable. His mind will be absolutely stable. Yogi sthanutvam apnoti. Tato, therefore, vayum nirodayet. You should control your mind. Very beautiful verse from Hatha Yoga Pradipika talking about pranayama. It says, this is the main reason why you do pranayama. Because what is the normal rate of breathing which you have in a minute, let us say? How many breaths do you take?
15.
15 to 18 is the average number of breaths. Now, when you do pranayama, even at the lowest ratio, how many breaths do you take in a minute?
Around 5.
You can actually calculate, right? So let us say that you are doing 4 seconds inhale. And you are, how much is the 4 seconds is inhalation? How much is the retention?
8.
No. The normal ratio is 4, 16, 8. Okay. So 4 is inhalation, 16 is retention, and 8 is exhalation. That's 4 plus 16 is 20, plus 8 is 20. It's half a minute. And therefore, in one round of pranayama, you're taking 2 breaths, as against the normal 15 to 18. Naturally, your mind is bound to be more stable, more relaxed. Okay, and this practice is called Nadi Shuddhanam or Nadi Shodhanam, also called Anulom Viloma. The more popular name is Anulom Viloma. And therefore, this Anulom Viloma is what is indicated here by Ramana Maharshi. And it is a must before you meditate. Now, I know that in the ashram and Milan, Shivananda ashram and Milan, we practice pranayama along with the general entire practice of us, pranayama, Surya Namaskar, all that comes together. But if you can incorporate that pranayama into a practice before you sit for meditation in the morning, that itself will be very, very good. Because that first the mind has slowed down, and with that quietened mind, you are sitting for meditation. So the entire Patanjali talks about only this. Patanjali has the second chapter, he says, Tasmin sati shwasa praswasha yoho gati vichheda pranayama. Tasmin sati. Tasmin sati has to be understood as while sitting, while being in that. Tasmin sati means while being in that, which in the context, if you see the context, Patanjali is saying that while sitting in that meditative asana, your lotus pose or whichever asana is sitting in, while sitting in that asana, tasmin sati, what should you do? Swasha praswasha yoho gati vichhedaha. Swasha, inhalation, praswasha, in exhalation. Gati is the speed, the flow. Vichhedaha is the break. So pranayama is very beautifully defined in that sutra. Swasha prashwasa yoho gati vichhedaha. That is pranayama. So you have to take a break. You have to break the flow of inhalation and exhalation. So vichhedaha is very important. If there is no break between the inhalation and exhalation, if there is no break in the rhythm, if the pranayama is a smooth flow of uninterrupted breathing, according to Patanjali, it is not pranayama. Like you have not taken a break at all. And that is why we do inhalation, we break it for 16 seconds, then do exhalation. Ideally, you should break there for a few seconds. But that we don't normally do. Anyway, so between the inhalation and exhalation, therefore, he says, introduce a pause. And the terms used in Patanjali Yoga Sutras are swasha, prashwasa, and gati vichhedaha. What are the corresponding terms in Hatha Yoga?
Puraka,
Puraka, Kumbhaka, Rejaka.
Puraka, Rejaka, Kumbhaka. So, Swasha here means inhalation, which Hatha Yoga Pradipika says Puraka. Puraka is inhalation. Prashwasaha is Rejaka, exhalation. Gati Vichhedaha, the break in the flow is Kumbhaka. And therefore, between your Puraka and Rejaka, you must introduce Kumbhaka. This Kumbhaka can be introduced either when you breathe in, and then when you breathe in, it's a must. You do inhalation, Puraka, then Kumbhaka, then you do a Rechaka. And afterwards you can actually introduce a small Kumbhaka. It's a more difficult Kumbhaka after exhalation, but it is possible. It's called Bahya Kumbhaka. It's after you exhale, introduce a small pause, and then do the inhalation. So this is what is being talked about by Patanjali. Now the beauty of all this is that there is another reason why we do Kumbhaka. Breathing is an autonomous function. It's a continuous process as long as the body is alive. We don't pay attention to it because we don't have to consciously say, oh, now I'm going to do inhalation, now I'm going to do exhalation. The body takes care of it. So it's an autonomous function. The body's function does not need your special attention. But when you do Kumbhaka, what are you doing? You are giving yourself time to be aware of this process. That, oh, I am breathing. Now I'm doing holding. I'm exhaling out. So the pranayama process enables you to be aware of the beauty of this process, which is keeping you alive. The thing is, the most important process which keeps you alive is breathing, and we don't pay any attention to it because it is autonomous. But let your breath stop for a minute and you'll be aware of it. So that's why Kumbhaka here. Okay, one question might arise over here. In this verse, Ramana did not mention asana. Asana practice, he didn't mention at all. But Patanjali, in his Ashtanga Yoga, Ashtanga practice, he mentions asana as a practice prior to pranayama. So yam, niyam, and then asana, and then only pranayama. Now, there are many acharyas with different views. Okay, so some acharyas interpret asana in Patanjali Yoga Sutras as only Padmasana, Siddhasana, Sukhasana, etc., which are the meditative asanas. Their interpretation is that nowhere this entire Patanjali Yoga Sutras is talking about the mind only. The entire chapter deals with the mind only, and therefore the body is not being taken care of, is not being addressed at all. And therefore, while you are talking about the mind only, you have to be talking only about the meditative asanas. And therefore, many acharyas, many traditional commentators, they interpret asana in the Ashtanga asana as Padmasana, Siddhasana, Sukhasana, and asanas of that particular nature. But there are other acharyas who say that there is no restriction. Patanjali has not clearly laid down any restriction. So there is no reason why all the asanas which form all the subject matter of Hatha Yoga Pradipika, why they cannot be interpreted as asana. So either way it is okay. I mean, it is basically for a Jnana Yogi, for those who are on the path of Jnanam, asana practice is not very important, excepting as a sadhana to keep your body in good shape. Right? Especially if you consider that if you're doing long meditation, or if you're doing long shravanam, then it is necessary to have a fit body so that you can sit without a backache for a long period of time. And while in shravanam and mananam, you can probably, twist and turn in your chair or on your seat. In a meditative, in dhyana yoga, that is not possible, because any disturbance in the body will affect the mind. And therefore, for a Jnana yogi who is doing nididhyasanam or dhyanam, it is important to have a very fit body. And that's when the practice of Hatha Yoga the importance of Hatha Yoga becomes extremely clear over here. Hatha Yoga is important because it teaches you how to keep the body motionless. Without a motionless body, remember, the mind can never become motionless. And that's why Shivananda Swami says, he uses the word asana jaya. And when he says asana jaya, he says you have to be able to sit in that asana for a particular period of time. Does anybody know what Shivananda Swami's time frame is for one asana?
Is it 2 hours?
It's 3 hours. Imagine sitting in one asana for 3 hours. For us, 30 minutes we can do. It's a great thing. Okay. So that's one term used. That is, Puraka Recha Kumbhaka. Remember that Bhagavad Gita uses different terms. It doesn't say Shwas Pravas, Sutrashwas. It doesn't say Kumbhaka, Puraka. What does it say?
Prana, apana.
And what is prana and what is apana, according to Gita?
Apana is inhalation.
Yes, apana is inhalation and prana is exhalation, which has to be remembered very clearly, because in Hatha Yoga, prana is taken as inhalation and apana is taken as exhalation. What is the logic behind saying that apana is inhalation? Those who have studied Tattva-bodha should have the answer.
It's the direction of the flow, which is down.
Apana flow is which way?
Downward.
Apana flows downward, right? And therefore, when you breathe in, the air is flowing downwards. And that is the logic why you say apana is inhalation. And prana is upwards. And that is why you say prana is exhalation. So this difference you must remember, because otherwise to confuse with the Hatha Yoga thing will be very easy. Hatha Yoga usually uses prana for inhalation and apana for exhalation. So what I am pointing out is all these terms are there and one has to interpret with wisdom and considering the overall consistency of the text. So always contextual interpretation is important. Otherwise, there is confusion. What is the advantage of pranayama? Patanjali mentions tataha kshiyate prakasha avaranam. So prakasha avaranam is covering over the light. Prakasha is jnanam. Prakasha avaranam is the covering over jnanam. Covering over jnanam is what? Ajnanam, ignorance. And tataha. This tataha has to be connected to pranayama. So from that pranayama practice, what will happen? Shiyate prakasha avaranam. Shiyate means destroyed. The covering over the knowledge, that is ajnanam, gets destroyed from pranayama. The mind becomes clearer, free from disturbances, and therefore only Patanjali again says, dharanasu yogyata manasaha. The mind is made fit for yoga through what? Through, and yogyata manasaha has to be connected to pranayama. Pranayama makes the mind fit for dharana. Dharana is concentration. The sixth of the Ashtanga Yoga. So to come to the concentration stage, you have to become a master of pranayama. And then only yogyata manasa, the mind becomes eligible to concentrate. And what is the sign? What is the measuring factor for a mind which is fit for dhyana yoga? How do you measure whether my mind is ready for meditation or for
FIR.
FIR? So all of you are aware of it, so I won't explain. Basically, FIR is frequency of disturbances in the mind, intensity of disturbances in the mind, and recovery time coming back to normal state of mind, quiet mind. All should be low. And the more you practice pranayama, and of course karma yoga, and of course upasana yoga, and pranayama. So all the three sadhanas, karma yoga, upasana yoga, and ashtanga yoga. You practice all three, the FIR will drop. Once the FIR drops, then you are ready for dhyana yoga or jnanam also. So now we look at the 12th verse. Please unmute yourself. Chittavayavas chittakriyayutaha Shakayo dvai shakti mulaka. Okay, so chitta vayavaha, that half sir is dropped. So chitta vayavaha chit kriya yutaha shakayo dvai shakti mulaka. Chitta vayavaha means chitta, the chitta and the vayu. Okay, that is so combination of two words, chitta vayavaha, chitta and vayu, which is mind and vayu, mind and prana. What do they have? Yutaha, chit kriya yutaha. They have got the chit, that is sattva guna, kriya, that is rajoguna. So that words have to be carefully interpreted. Chit here stands for sattva guna, kriya stands for rajoguna, sattva guna stands for jnana shakti, rajoguna stands for kriya shakti. So I hope you are familiar with the three shaktis. What are they? Jnana shakti, kriya shakti,
Ichha Shakti.
ichha shakti. No man can survive without, no human being can survive without these three shaktis. So here he is saying mind and prana, they have yutaha. They are endowed with chit and kriya. That is jnana shakti and kriya shakti. Chit is basically sattva guna. Kriya shakti means kriya is rajoguna. You understand, right? Sattva guna, it takes care of knowledge, and rajoguna makes you act, makes you do karma. That's why the interpretation is given. Therefore, mind and prana have got jnana shakti and kriya shakti. Therefore, what? Shakayoho dvai. These are the two branches. What are the two branches? Rajasa Kriya Shakti and Satvika Jnana Shakti. Right? So, how do you connect to mind and prana? Kriya Shakti is connected to pranaha. Right? That you have to be very careful about. Kriya Shakti is connected to pranaha. So, ultimately the reading will be that pranaha is endowed with Kriya Shakti and manas is endowed with Jnana Shakti. So, Rajasa Shakti Yukta Pranaha and Jnana Shakti Yukta Manaha. These are two branches of what? The last word, Shakti Mulaka. Mulaka is the seed. Shakti is Maya. Okay. So essentially he is saying that the mind endowed with Sadguna, that is Jnana Shakti, and the prana endowed with Rajoguna, that is Kriya Shakti. These are the two branches of the main tree. The main tree is Shakti, that is Maya. Mulaka is the seed. Okay. So this Jnana Shakti and Kriya Shakti are the two branches of Maya, and Maya is the Mulaka, is the seed of Brahman, which is the Mulam, which is the root cause. So here, this particular mantra, Ramana Maharishi is trying to explain to us what is the concept of controlling the mind through breath. We talked about in the last verse in practical terms. But here he says that same Maya, that same Prakriti, out of that Prakriti only prana and mind are born. How do you know? Tattva-bodha? Do you remember how the Antakaranam is born and how Rajas is and Prana is born? What is the process of creation which provides for Prana and which provides for Antakaranam?
The process of purification of the elements.
Yeah, what? Out of what? Out of
First comes from Prakriti comes Mahat, intelligence. Then comes the Gunas, the Naham, and then the mind, Chitta.
No, there is another more detailed process in Tattva-bodha. Out of the Rajasic aspect of the Pancha Mahabhuta, what is born? And
Karmendriya.
Prana is born from where?
From the Rajasic aspect.
Rajasika.
Correct. So Prana is born from the Rajasic aspect and Antakaranam is born from the Sattvic aspect. So all this you have to connect. And the whole purpose of doing Tattva-bodha is that it should be available at your fingertips all throughout the study of the Veda, of any Vedantic text. Because all this has to, you can't just accept it because Ramana Maharishi says so. You have studied it, Ramana Maharishi is just pointing it out. So he says both prana and the mind are born out of different aspects of the same Prakriti, the same Maya. The basic Vedanta is Srishti Prakarana. Maya consists of what? Tattva, Rajas and Tamas, three gunas. Tattva is Jnana Shakti, Rajas is Kriya Shakti. From that Sattvic aspect of Maya, Mana is born. From the Rajasic aspect of Maya, Prana is born. Therefore, both are children of the same mother, Maya. So, Prana and Manaha, they are siblings. And that's why he says they are like two branches of a tree coming out of the same trunk. And if you pull one branch, what happens? The other one also moves. Right? Like the two wheels of a cycle. You pull one wheel, the other one also has to move. And therefore, if you have got a motorcycle, ever ridden a motorcycle or a scooter, you will notice the engine is connected only to the back wheel. The front wheel, there is no engine. Front wheel moves because the back wheel moves. And therefore, he is saying that using that logic, there is no need to specifically find a tool to control the mind. You have a ready-made tool by way of pranayama, You regulate your breath. If you control the breath, you are controlling the mind also. Therefore, pranayama is a very, very useful sadhana. Any questions so far?
Acharya ji.
Yes,
Sorry,
please.
please carry on.
Yes, June.
Thank you, Acharya. So I have two questions because the other day I was listening to
I have one question of you, June. First,
Yes,
why do you always have only two questions? Why not three or one?
I don't know.
Okay, fine. Go ahead. Okay.
Okay, so the other day I was listening to yoga teacher and he about the pranapana in the hatha yoga context.
Okay.
And I was thinking that he was wrong, but today you clarified that this is how hatha yogis view these two energies.
Yes.
But why they invert them? Do you know why this happened?
It's just convention. I haven't seen anything where in any text in Hatha Yoga Pradipika, of course, I am no expert on these texts, but I haven't seen anywhere where this is defined like that. The only definition I have found is in some one, of course, Bhagavad Gita, and then there are some other Vedantic texts which talk about the reason why they are named. But I think it's just convention that prana apana is being taken. Basically, because prana is taken as the life force.
Yes.
And if life force is there, the life is equated to inhalation, breathing oxygen. That's why I think prana is taken as breathing. There's no other reason. Literally, it is adho gacchati apana. Goes below. What goes below is gacchati. Urdhvam gacchati pranaha. That is the correct, what they call, way to see. Prana goes upwards, apana goes downwards. But it's very clear only in Vedantic texts. I don't think Hatha Yoga Pradipika has talked about it.
Okay. Thank you. And I forgot the second question, but if I remind, I will ask later.
Anyway, no problem. Okay, anybody else?
Acharya ji, I have a question pertaining to verse number 10.
Okay.
When we are saying that the mind needs to abide in its true nature.
Yeah.
So I don't know, it may be a very basic question, but
What does it
the
mean?
mind, yes, what exactly does it mean? Because the mind is supposed to be a part of the anatma. It's a continuous flow of thought. Then what does it mean that it abides in its true nature? And how then does one become Brahmanish? Because one who is Brahman cannot, how does it relate to the mind and being?
So this is a good question. In fact, a lot of people use the term abiding in your true nature, resting in your true nature. All these they use without really knowing what it means. So it's a good question. What is the true nature of any ornament?
Gold.
Gold,
Oh,
right? What is the true nature of the pot?
clay.
Clay. And therefore, we are saying that anatma is mithya. Mithya means what? It's a dependent on something else. So if you take the necklace and gold example, the necklace is name and form, which is mithya because it is dependent upon the gold. Anatma is mithya because it is dependent upon atma. And therefore the true nature of anatma is nothing but atma. And therefore when you say that I am abiding, I mean there is no physical process of abiding. Abiding simply means that you have nishtha, that you never forget in and through all your transactions in the world, you never forget one important point, that I am Brahman. That is called abiding in your true nature. There is no other meaning, remember. There is no abidance in your true nature apart from remembering that you are Brahman continuously all the time.
But remembering will always be a thought.
Yes.
So then
Any knowledge is also a thought. The fact that you want moksha is also for anatma only, right? As atma, you don't need moksha. Remember that any process of learning, any transaction, any vyavahara, automatically anatma is involved. Teaching anatma is involved. Learning anatma is involved. So from that point only, from the Vyavaharika point only, you can view everything. You cannot say a thing like, if thought is involved, that is anatma, then how can it be atma? It's very simple, because that thought is mithya. Mithya vastu is not counted. Therefore only it is atma.
Okay.
So it's a subtle point which we'll repeat again and again until it goes in. That there are no two things. There is only one thing. It is only in yoga philosophy that Prakriti and Purusha are two independent things, and Sankhya philosophy also. But in fact, all other philosophy, every other darsana, excepting Advaita darsana, there are always Prakriti and Purusha are two different things.
But when we say that, okay, so we are essentially just taking that anatma is mithya and therefore it is not there. We don't say that
You
know,
cannot
the
count
thoughts
it.
are also.
You cannot count it. It is mithya.
Right. Right. Okay. Thank you, Acharya. I'll think about it. It's like a little difficult to.
It's a
understand.
very subtle concept. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? All right. So let us look at verse number 13. Please unmute yourself. Laya vinashane ubhayarodhane Layagatam punar bhavati nomritam.
Jayagatam
Okay. So laya vinashane. So dissolving, laya can be taken as dissolution. Vinashane can be taken as destruction. So laya vinashane, two things are being mentioned. No, they are not one word. Layam and vinashanam are two different words. Layam means temporary destruction. Vinashanam is removal completely, permanent destruction. Ubhaya rodhane. Ubhayam means two, right? So laya and vinashanam, ubhayam rodhane, there are two types of control of the mind. Rodhane here is mind. Therefore, the first sentence means laya vinashane, ubhaya rodhane. There are two types of control of the mind. One is layam and one is vinashanam. What is the difference? Layagatam punar bhavati. Layagatam means what is temporarily destroyed, punar bhavati, comes up again. Okay, so you have to supply mind. When the mind is layagatam, temporarily destroyed, and so you don't say destroyed, you say resolved or dissolved. So when the mind is dissolved, punar bhavati, after some time, that mind can awake again. But na mrutam, the destroyed mind will never rise again. So in simple English, resolving and destruction of the mind are the two methods available to us to control the mind. Among these two, the resolved mind, the temporarily dissolved mind, it will waken up again, it will rise again, but the destroyed mind will never rise again because the mind is destroyed. Very beautiful verse. It has to be understood very, very clearly. Okay. So far we saw that Karma Yoga, Upasana Yoga, Ashtanga Yoga are all the preparatory steps, essential preparatory steps to come to Jnana Yoga. And they do not by themselves give liberation. Only Jnana Yoga gives liberation. Everybody has to finally come to Jnana Yoga to get moksha. It's like the temples, I don't know about the temples everywhere, but some of the temples in the south, there is one door to the inner sanctum. And there are many doors into the temple itself. So then you can have up to four doors entering the temple, but there is one door to the sanctum. So the four doors represent the other supporting disciplines, Karma, Upasana, Ashtanga Yoga, Kundalini Yoga, all these are represented by the other doors. But the entry into the sanctum, where the deity is actually placed, That is only Jnana Yoga. Okay, so here we have to talk a little bit about the principles of Jnana Yoga, the scriptural teaching. So here I'll explain it very briefly because we have done it in great detail and we will be doing it again and again in all the other texts as well as Bhagavad Gita, Upanishads, all these places. So here let me just give you an overview. The Shastra says that basically you are Purnam. You are Brahman, you are Atman, you are Purnam, you are complete. However, because of the close association with the Upadis, the body, mind, sense complex, the attributes of the body, mind complex are transferred to you, the Atma, and your attribute, which is what? Your attribute is being infinite, being Satyam, that is transferred to the body mind complex. So this two-way transference is called Anyonya Adhyasa. And the problem is because the finite attributes of the body, mind and mind complex, that you transfer it to yourself. Therefore, you take yourself as being finite, having all the problems of the body mind complex. And therefore, you think that you are apurna. You are not finite. You are not infinite. Apurnatvam is there. But at the back of the mind, somewhere there is a vasana that no, actually I'm purna. That vasana expresses how in the desire to be purna. Right? This sense of apurnatvam is false. It is upahitam. It has been transferred from the body mind complex. But because of the transfer, you end up thinking that you are apurnam. However, somewhere you know that that is not the state. My real state is purna. And therefore, the desire to be purna is born. So from apurnatvam, desires are born. And the desires express themselves in a way of karma. So you think the solution is to acquire things and get rid of things. And therefore, the mind begins to look outwards. Because everything is outwards. All acquisitions are always from outwards. So instead of looking inwards at myself, the Atma, I start to look outwards. As long as my mind has this outward orientation, where is the solution? The solution is not outward. Solution is not outside, it's inside me. And therefore, as long as my outward orientation remains, I cannot see the problem. The problem here is the mind which has an external orientation. And therefore, if one wants to get moksha, which is samsara rahitam, getting rid of samsara, one has to learn to control the problem, which is the mind, the externally oriented mind. And the main aim of Jnana Yoga, there are often people who say the Jnana Yoga's purpose is to destroy the mind. But we have to amend that. The main purpose of Jnana Yoga is to understand that the problems of the mind are not my mind, not my problems. I am not the mind. And therefore, you can say the aim of Jnana Yoga is to remove the problematic mind, to destroy the problematic mind, not the whole mind. And this problematic mind, this removal, is what is called Rodhanam by Ramana Maharshi. And this, remember that when we say removing the mind, we are talking about removing that mind which is the cause of problems, not the mind per se, because the mind is required for knowledge, right? And this problematic mind can be removed in two ways. One is by layaha, so mano layaha, temporarily dissolving the mind in the form of some sort of external sadhana, temporarily dissolving. It can also happen naturally in Sushupti Avastha, right? So in that Sushupti Avastha, for example, the mind is not functional. It has become dormant. And in the dormant state, the mind is free from problems. Okay. Now, Ashtanga Yoga, Pranayama and Yoga Samadhi, Ashtanga Yoga Samadhi can achieve this temporary calm and quiet mind. It's known as Apekshika Shanti, relative Shanti. Why? Because it is only temporary and it can come back again, which is what he says here, that it can come back again. But this Apekshika Shanti, this relative Shanti is necessary for you even to come to class. Sitting in Vedanta class, especially in Upanishad class or in Bhagavad Gita class or advanced Prakarana class, without that Apekshika Shanti, you will not understand anything because the mind will be wandering, it will be disturbed. So the problematic mind can be temporarily resolved with Apekshika Shanti, with things like Ashtanga Yoga, Samadhi, Pranayama, etc. Or the second is Mana Vinashaha, which is the permanent removal of the mind. Now here, Vinashana means a destruction of the problematic mind. And this Ramana Maharshi discusses in the 14th verse. Remember again, not the destruction of the mind, but the destruction of the problematic mind. That destruction is permanent, and that permanent destruction is called Atyantika Shanti. So Apekshika Shanti is relative destruction, temporary removal. Atyantika Shanti is permanent removal. Once Atyantika Shanti is got, you are beyond the touch of karma. So as a sadhaka, I may go in for layam, I may go in for Apekshika Shanti, but I have to go in for Apekshika Shanti because for my very study, I need a quiet mind. But my final aim is not Apekshika Shanti. It is not relative removal of the mind. It is permanent removal of the problematic mind. So Vinashanam is the ultimate aim of the sadhaka. With this, I'll stop for today. Any questions we can take?
Acharya.
Yeah.
When we say the problematic mind, what you're saying is essentially the mind which is associated with the delusion, the rag, moh, or all that. That is the problematic mind because of the ignorance that it is not the Atma and it is Anatma.
The mind which is, number one, of course, ignorant of the fact that it is the Atma. So it thinks it is Anatma. And therefore, all the problems of the Anatma are, of course, associated with that mind. And it is because of that indisciplined, immature mind that you have problems. A mature mind is capable of disregarding the problems. With the immature mind will be overwhelmed by the problems.
So we can say it's a part of the sattvic mind also, if we say that the sattvic aspect of the mind also comes.
Your entire
disregarding.
sadhana is towards making the mind more and more sattvic. A sattvic mind is by nature, by definition, sattvic mind is a mature mind.
Okay.
So problematic mind actually means the problematic thoughts in the mind.
Mind is nothing but thoughts.
Yes.
There is no separate entity.
So destruction of the mind actually means discipline, control of the mind.
No, destruction of the mind means understanding that I am not the mind. That is permanent destruction. That is why Atyantika, it does not arise again.
Okay, so
But that means the sattvic aspect is also destroyed in this.
Of course, of course.
Okay.
No, you don't take it destruction in that, but there's nothing destroyed. Your mind doesn't get destroyed. No, the person whose mind is not available is basically a piece of stone. The mind basically becomes aware that I am Brahman, and therefore it is at permanent peace. Because of the fact that I am Brahman, all the problems of the world will not disturb the mind.
So, sir, can we also interpret it in this way that when we are speaking of Manolaya, the mind is in a sattvic state, and when we are speaking of Manonasha, we are speaking of the Atyantik mind, which is permanent.
Manonasha is simply jnanam. That is the only way. If you become a jnani, then only there is Manonasha.
Okay.
For anybody else who is not a jnani, it is always laya.
Thank you.
Okay, so with this we'll stop. Thank you for your patience. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnam Eva Vasishyate Om Shanti 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 Om Tat Sat Om Namah Shivaya. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.